Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Up first this week for our two games is 2012's Far Cry 3, a frat boy's descent into island pirate madness, to learn about the definition of insanity and how important a charismatic antagonist can be.
Following that is one of the most famous PlayStation sequels of all time, putting the player in control of a rookie cop who finds himself in the middle of a zombie outbreak in the infamous Raccoon City, 1998's Resident Evil 2.
Really excited to talk about these games this week. I think if there's a theme between them, they are sequels that ended up setting the trajectory for their franchise's respective futures.
Yes, very much so. Far Cry 3 has basically made a template that 4, 5, and 6 have followed pretty much to a T.
Mm-hmm.
And Resident Evil 2 obviously set off the idea that Resident Evil itself could just be sort of this collection of vaguely connected stories happening in various places.
Yeah, not just a one-off that establishes a survival horror genre. So, interesting soundtracks to go along with them. People may be wondering, the original Resident Evil 2? How does that soundtrack sound? Well, we will get to that. But first, Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
Oh boy, I'm still very, very slowly getting through Case 2-4. I think I'm halfway through now.
Okay.
Of Ace Attorney. So, that's happening.
Great Ace Attorney Chronicles for those who are just joining.
Great Ace Attorney Chronicles specifically, yeah. I played a couple of chapters of Life is Strange True Colors.
Oh, neat.
I think it is quite good so far, though. So, I don't know if I sent you the video of the
yes
the streamer mode with that dancing scene, right?
You did, yes.
Like 20 minutes later, there's a scene where the main character gets a guitar and she starts playing Creep by Radiohead, and that is also muted.
Wow.
And that's within a 20-minute... Just hire people to write a song for you guys. Just hire someone. It's absolutely hilarious. Playing this game on streamer mode must be the most surreal experience video games could ever have. I've been playing a little bit of Disco Elysium, which hopefully maybe my review for the Switch version should be out at time of release yesterday. We'll see if that actually happens, because at time of recording, it is Thursday, and I still don't feel like I have played enough to write a review. They did not give us a huge window of time there, but I'll talk more about that when we play more of it. Forget all that, though. Who cares? I played Imposter Factory.
You sure did.
I need to make sure you're sitting down before I say this. You are correct?
I am. I don't stand during podcast recordings.
You never know. I think it might surpass To the Moon.
Based on what I've been reading you say on Twitter, @StringPixel, and Discord and things like that, it doesn't surprise me you've come to this conclusion, and yet it's shocking nonetheless, though at the same time, Kangao can do no wrong.
So, we talked about Finding Paradise a couple weeks ago, and how, yeah, it's good, but it doesn't hit quite the same as To the Moon does. Imposter Factory is a semi-truck carrying To the Moon with it, so that hits you on the highway. It is so good. It is, I'm pretty sure, going to end up my game of the year at the end of the year. I cannot see anything ripping it off of that space. It's so good. I recommend it, though I should note, while To the Moon was not required reading for Finding Paradise, Finding Paradise, for one specific reason, is required reading for Imposter Factory, because something happens that the game makes absolutely no effort to explain to you that is intimately connected with the events of Finding Paradise. So,
okay.
100%. Everybody go play this series. Oh my god, Imposter Factory was so good.
That is really good to hear, and I think I've got to put that higher on my priority list.
Oh, I've played a bunch of Next Fest. Most of the demos I've played, I'm not going to lie, they've sucked. They've sucked.
What was the best demo you played?
My favorite is a demo for a game called Mirror Layers, which puts you in an escape room, and you have access to a computer that hooks up to an in-world social network that is actually being like filled with real players, like other people playing the game. And you can upload like files for other players to use and consult with other players about like hints and stuff like that. It's really, really neat. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing how the full game pulls that off. It looks like based on the trailer at the end, it's going to be a lot more horror based with like monsters and stuff, but very impressed with that one overall.
Okay, good to hear. And hopefully you play some better demos in the meantime too.
I hope so.
I didn't get to play too many games this week, though I did make more progress on Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. Because I was like, I haven't gotten back to that in a few months. Let's play a little more of that. I'm going to guess maybe I'm like half to 2/3 through. I don't know. We put back together the Dimensionator. I don't know if that means I'm like close to the end game, which it could be, or if like, there's going to be one more thing that's going to extend the game out longer. So we'll see what happens there.
One day I'm going to have to get to that. I haven't bought it yet, and I really should because of the whole like put my money where my mouth is, i.e. the crunch situation. That's not to speak of any of the studio culture that has been talked about lately at Insomniac. But yeah, just there's too many games have come out this year. There's too many games. And last week Metroid Dread came out. Like, oh my god. Well, at time of release last week, it's not out here yet.
I mean, it's been a crazy year for games already. I don't know if it's going to be like easy or difficult to pick like game of the year candidates when it's all said and done. I think it's been a weird year on the COVID delaying games front for that, but it's still going to be insane for best of 2021. I don't know how we're going to manage picking the best game soundtracks of the year.
We're so screwed.
But that's next month and the month after that's problem. In the meantime, let's talk about some composer follow-up news. Not too much to talk about this week, but we do have to get to when it comes to video game industry news highlights and how it relates to the composers we've talked about on this show. There is one thing above all else. You'll remember as of our last episode of release, we released it on the morning of the last Smash Brothers Ultimate character is going to be announced today. We didn't know when we recorded the episode who it was going to be at all. Well, we now do. And I was hoping beyond hope for Sora from Kingdom Hearts to make it into Super Smash Brothers. At, the peril of being mocked, and there's no way Disney will let that happen.
From me, I'm the one that said those things.
You just gotta take the Disney out of Sora, and you can get Sora, the most requested character from the Wii U Super Smash Bros. Ballot, got in as the last character to wrap up Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I still can't believe it.
You and me, I think we were talking after it, where we both sort of had this feeling at the beginning when it shows the flame fall down. It's like, oh, this is Dark Souls. It's going to be Dark Souls.
He's going to sit down by the campfire, and that's the solitary flame of the darkness.
The whole thing with Sora, the only reason that I'm a little bit disappointed in him, make no mistake, holy crap, Sora's in Smash. I am shocked and never have been more happy to be the most wrong I've ever been in my entire life. But I am sad that despite knowing that was probably going to be the case, the compromises that had to be made because he's a character owned by Disney, very, very closely related to various big Disney brands. So the fact that he has the Mickey keychain on his Keyblade is actually a miracle.
However much they paid to get that, especially be the key shot in the trailer, that's all they needed. That's the defining moment. It was interesting to see reactions, some people thinking how Mario grabbed the fire, or how he threw it. I mean, you're good for them. If you could see it through the YouTube pixelization of the sword when it stopped at the keyblade, if you could see it make the shape out through that, you're good for you. But I mean, that money shot, that was worth everything.
I do wish they had shelled out to at least be able to put Donald and Goofy as like spirits, or at least
The final smash.
The final smash, definitely, or like at the very least on the stage is Hollow Bastion, and then near the end of the match it changes to Dive to the Heart.
Oh yeah,
and there's the stained glass background in the back, and on Sora's, Donald and Goofy show up, and they had to replace them with a Paopu fruit and a rat.
Yeah, don't do that.
It's so stupid.
But you know what? He's got the Valor suit, and he's got the Wisdom suit, those forms. That means they're in the game somehow.
And Timeless River, baby.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they're in Valor, and maybe that's why it's Valor and Wisdom.
Maybe, because you didn't need Wisdom, but I mean, yeah, what a great pull. So, of course, how it relates to video game music. Kingdom Hearts, the original Kingdom Hearts from 2002, is the primary inspiration for a lot of Sora's moves, the stage, obviously. So they pulled a lot from that game specifically, and the music was no exception. We've talked about the original Kingdom Hearts before. Several of those tracks are in Super Smash Bros. There is one arranged track. It is Yoko Shimomura, of course, the Kingdom Hearts composer, arranging the Victory Fanfare, which is a take on the track Hand in Hand. A shame that more Kingdom Hearts music could not make it, but you know, that's Square being stingy with music, as they do.
Not a single organization boss theme. For shame. For shame.
Disappointing. But wow, what a win, what a pull. Well done, Sakurai. Thank you. Get your rest.
Take a nap, please. So, Grant Kirkhope. This isn't related to Smash anymore, even though Grant Kirkhope is one of the people that has a remix of Smash. Yeah, whatever. He actually composed for the Minecraft Dungeons Hidden Depths DLC, which makes two composers that we have talked about that have then gone on to work on Minecraft in some shape or form, the other being Lena Raine, who did music for the Nether update of actual Minecraft. I haven't played Minecraft Dungeons. I don't have a lot of desire to play Minecraft Dungeons, but that's a pretty cool get, I will say. I also want to give a quick shout out real quick to Eidos Montreal.
Yeah.
Who just today at time of recording announced that they are moving to a 4-day work week. That's pretty cool, though rumblings have said that this does not currently apply to the QA testers employed by Eidos, because they do not consider them to technically be Eidos employees. That kind of sucks. Please fix that part, but otherwise, hey, this is a step in the right direction.
I think more businesses would do better as long as they trust their employees to make sure they get their work done and not demand a certain amount of time out of them for their work-life balance.
I agree.
But you know, unionize. That's the next step.
Yeah, it sure is. Unionize, guys. Just do it.
All right, let's get into talking about our first game this week of sequels that set the trajectory for their franchise's futures. And let's talk about Far Cry 3. Let's just talk about Far Cry in general, because it was interesting to learn about the origins of the franchise. See, the first Far Cry game was released in 2004 on PC, and it was developed by Crytek, as it was the first use of their CryEngine software. It was a game that was published by Ubisoft. And so after the original Far Cry's success, Crytek wanted to show that CryEngine had other application possibilities. So they signed a deal with Electronic Arts. And Ubisoft didn't like that because EA is a competitor to Ubisoft as a big video game publisher. And so Crytek would work with Electronic Arts to have their CryEngine power a franchise that would become known as the Crysis series. Now, Ubisoft still had the publishing rights to the original Far Cry, so they would get their Montreal studio to port Far Cry to consoles with different subtitles like Instincts and Vengeance. But in 2006, Ubisoft just bought the rights to the IP. And so Ubisoft Montreal then developed a sequel, Far Cry 2, and changed quite a bit about how the game played and how it was structured and all that. And Far Cry 2 released in 2008. And so what happens when you make a sequel off of that? You get Far Cry 3, which released November 29th, 2012 for Australia. Australia with the earliest release date for once. Oh my goodness.
That's not going to be the case for my game, I'll tell you that right now.
Well, that does make sense when your game came out. And so this released on Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PC. Europe got the game the next day on November 30th, and North America would get the game on December 4th, 2012. A remaster called Far Cry 3 Classic Edition released on June 26th, 2018 for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. You can probably also get it on PC, I would imagine, but it was primarily part of Far Cry 5's Season Pass. So it would have come included if you got the Season Pass or the Gold Edition for Far Cry 5. Also standalone, though, as an option. So you have options on how to play Far Cry 3 today. The game is developed by Ubisoft Montreal and published by Ubisoft. Far Cry 3 is a first-person action-adventure game with first-person shooter combat. Also stealth combat if you want to sneak up and knife people. There are also role-playing elements with experience points and skill trees for abilities involved. You can approach missions either with guns blazing or with stealth. You hunt wildlife for crafting materials, and you can travel across the open world using a variety of vehicles, including dune buggies, all-terrain vehicles, cargo trucks, jet skis, boats, and hang gliding. You eventually get a wingsuit, so there are options. The story of Far Cry 3 involves Jason Brody being on vacation with his group of friends. They're all some preppy kids.
I forgot that his last name is Brody.
I know, right? And so they're in the fictional Rook Islands between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. And they're all celebrating Jason's younger brother Riley receiving a pilot's license. On a skydiving trip, they land on an island that turns out to be a pirate base. And they are kidnapped by pirate lord Vas Montenegro, who plans to sell them into slavery. Now, Jason escapes with the help of his older brother Grant, who is killed by Vas. Jason is rescued by Dennis, who is an adopted member of the island's native Rakyat tribe. Dennis recognizes Jason's potential as a warrior and just reading the Wikipedia article, I swear. I'm trying to remember how this story went myself. So he gives him the tatau, which are the tattoos of a Rakyat warrior. Jason then helps the Rakyat in a number of missions, which leads him to find one of his friends, Daisy, at the house of Dr. Earnhardt, a botanist who is studying the island's flora. Impressed with Jason's prowess, the Rakyat allow him to become the second outsider, after Dennis, to enter their sacred temple. After he returns the silver dragon knife, a Rakyat relic, Jason is initiated into the tribe by the priestess Citra. So the questions remain, can Jason save his friends, or can Jason Brody save his friends? Who is the true power in the Rook Islands? And how loyal can Jason stay to the Rakyat tribe? Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Far Cry 3?
I'm pretty sure I own it. I've played maybe half an hour of it. I don't know, Ubisoft-style open-world games have not been my bag for a while. But I saw a bunch of videos of funny encounters with wildlife in Far Cry 3. And I was like, I want that. The only other things I know about Far Cry 3 is my roommate Ben loves it because it lets him do goofy stuff and also interact with, like, crocodiles and stuff. But he has told me so many times that the story is absolutely god-awful. Mm-hmm. And hearing that summary, oh boy.
Yeah, that was a pretty common critique of critics. Let's just say that. But it is a game that really did establish, Far Cry as a whole, as you mentioned at the top of the show. Like, we'll talk about how they kind of had to deviate from what the first two Far Cry games were. And then they're like, oh, you put a compelling villain in a play space with a generic protagonist and just let the player run free? Well, dang, okay. This is a Far Cry game now, so yeah, that's the gist of it. Like you, I've only played so much, I think maybe about an hour, to be honest. And where did I stop? Right around that part where Jason Brody goes and finds his friend Daisy at Dr. Earnhardt's house. Like, that's kind of where I stopped playing the game. I thought that I would continue it. I was having some good fun with it, but then other things came up, and as is how you play lots of games, if that's what you like to do, as we do. So,
did you ever play Far Cry 2?
No, I did not.
So I played a little bit of Far Cry 2 because the biggest selling point in that game was, hey, our fire physics are really good.
But then don't you like randomly get malaria?
I think so. I don't remember because when I loaded up Far Cry 2, the only time I ever did, I set the whole jungle on fire and then got bored and closed it because that's all the game had to offer me.
Sick.
So this was a step up from that, at least.
Yeah, I could see how that would be. Let's talk about how the game was made, though, because it's an interesting continuation off of the odd beginnings of the Far Cry series. So, as we mentioned, Ubisoft Montreal developed Far Cry 2, and so they continued to be the lead developer for Far Cry 3. They were responsible for creating the game's single-player campaign, but overall, the game was a global production that involved multiple Ubisoft studios. There was Massive Entertainment, who now works on The Division. They created the game's multiplayer portion. Ubisoft Shanghai designed the missions and crafted the AI of the wildlife. Ubisoft Bucharest provided quality assurance. Ubisoft Reflections assisted Montreal on the design of the vehicles. And Red Storm Entertainment was responsible for making the PC version and the game's user interface. So,
holy, that's so many different studios working on one game.
I mean, honestly, it kind of sounds like how Assassin's Creed games are now. It's like all hands on deck in different parts and different aspects. Ironically enough, with Ubisoft Montreal being the lead.
I guess it's also a lot like nowadays when we hear about Call of Duty, where there are like 6 studios that have been locked in the Call of Duty mines forever.
Sure, I think that's actually a pretty fair comparison as well. So, Far Cry 3's pre-production started around 2008, after they shipped Far Cry 2, and more than 90 people worked on the game. Now, Far Cry 3 was initially planned to form a single, cohesive narrative with the previous installments of the series, but this was abandoned when the game's development was partially restarted in 2010 due to the departure of several creative staff, including the original creative director and narrative director. And it makes you wonder how the series would have continued if it went down this track with the original vision. At least the team was trying to create a dynamic open world with this game, as the team saw Rook Island, or the Rook Islands, as the second most important character. Good. That's good world design, actually.
That is a good way to, that's a great way to approach that.
As opposed to traditional game design, in which the designers carefully calculate where and how to place environmental objects on a grid, the team instead experimented with dynamic cover design and utilized an algorithm provided by their Dunia engine to quickly procedural generate the layout of a large area. And then the team would manually adjust the placement of different objects and then test the output. This created over 250 kinds of different hostile encounters, and a system overall that remembered each encounter, and then only recycled it after extended play. Who would be the most important character if the Rook Islands were the second most important? Well, that would be the protagonist, Jason Brody, who is obviously going through a morally gray experience. This preppy frat kid who's landing in this world and then has to rescue his friends by killing people. And the team wished to contrast this difference between the players having fun with the game, but Jason going through this terrible journey. Oddly enough, Elias Toufexis, who's the voice actor who played Adam Jensen in the recent Deus Ex games, he was initially chosen to voice Jason, although he was replaced by Gianpaolo Venuta 2 years later than what they originally planned. If Jason then is the most important character, let's talk about the character that has remained in the public consciousness when people think of Far Cry 3, and that would be the man on the cover, Vas Montenegro. Initially, the game's primary villain was named Bull, and he was designed as a bald, muscular man who looked close to a 300-pound, 6-foot-tall bullmastiff dog. The character was redesigned, though, after the actor Michael Mando auditioned for this role, as his physicality was very different from what the developers had planned. Bull's physical fierceness transformed into the villain's emotive and volatile personality. Then there was a second iteration of this character, and he was named Pyro, and he featured a heavily mutilated body, though these features were later removed, as Mando's portrayal of Vas enabled his personality to be expressed through subtle mannerisms. And here's the kicker: Vas is not even the main villain of the game.
What? I didn't know that.
Here's a spoiler for the almost 10-year-old Far Cry 3. Vas dies at the halfway point of the game.
What?
He is not the main villain of Far Cry 3. I know that Far Cry has liked to treat him as the main villain, especially when you talk about the expansion pass for Far Cry 6 here being like, you get to go back through all of the big villains throughout Far Cry. Joseph Seed, Pagan Min, Vas Montenegro. It's like, no. Yes, everyone remembers him through the brilliant performance of Michael Mando, and have I ever told you the definition of insanity, and just famous cutscenes and all, but no, he is not the main villain. And so, if anything, I think they learned from, how to handle that. Oh, maybe put Pagan Min and Joseph Seed and Far Cry 6's Anton Castillo. Have them be the main villains at the end of the game. But yeah, spoiler, that's not the case with Vas. And maybe that was kind of a mistake that they had to then correct in the future.
Huh. I imagine this is what it was like when I revealed there was a second half to Trauma Team and you didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I did not know that. I didn't know any of that. All right. Well, that's interesting.
It's kind of disappointing. Yeah. But, I don't know. Maybe they had to pad things out. I don't know. It is a shame because, yeah, Michael Mando, incredible actor. I mean, I think he's in Better Call Saul. He is Matt Gargan, Scorpion, in the MCU's take on Spider-Man. Just a brilliant actor. And I think it was one of those roles in video games where it's like, look, you can take this actor and performance capture and like really make memorable characters out of it. I feel like a lot of people like point to Vas as like an early 2010s example of like how to do that.
And I think it says something that Vas is treated this way if he's dead at the halfway mark. What does that say to you about how far most people got in Far Cry 3?
Ding, ding, ding. So there were inspirations that were taken from films and TV shows such as Apocalypse Now, The Deer Hunter, Requiem for a Dream, and Lost, as well as video games such as The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim and Red Dead Redemption, particularly for their open world progression design. Just how the team kind of took different inspirations from media on how to craft this world of the Rook Islands and what Jason Brody would go through. The game was revealed at E3 2011. They originally planned to release the game in September 2012, but of course it got delayed. There was all sorts of promotion and marketing with the game, including a companion app to play alongside the game, because that was the big thing, the second screen experience at the time. There was a Facebook app, a Minecraft pack. There was a Machinima web series with Michael Mando as Vas, and Christopher Mintz-Plasse, yes, the actor who played McLovin in Superbad, playing himself. The most interesting one, though, was apparently to promote the game at PAX East. Players who shaved their head or received a permanent tribal tattoo would receive a free copy of the game. Video game marketing has changed.
And to think this is tame compared to some of the other crap that went on like 5 years before that.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's changed a lot over the time for sure. The game reviewed very well with a Metacritic average of 88 on PC, got a 90 on PS3 and 91 on Xbox 360. Praise was directed at its characters, particularly the antagonist Voss. The world design, the visuals, the progression, and the gameplay were also highlights. It was a fun game to play and go through. But some narrative decisions, particularly a lot of drug use, the idea of the white savior frat boy coming into this area with native folk, though the narrative designers would have you believe that they are kind of controlling Jason to do what they will, but it still comes off as a weird trope. And also the idea that he suddenly has all of these combat skills and that he is amazing at all of this. That's super weird. Also, some subject matter like misogyny and homophobia wasn't great then, hasn't aged well, I'm sure. And also the game's multiplayer modes also received criticism. But it was odd that it was like a standout when, a lot of outlets or like the Spike Video Game Awards were being like, all right, what are our game of the year for 2012? Oh, there's this game, this game. Oh, Far Cry 3 came out so late in the year in December that as we play it later, we would have liked to include it, but sorry, not in the best of 2012 things here.
So it was the cyberpunk of its year.
Yeah.
Except mostly functional as far as I'm aware.
Right. I mean, but also, like Cyberpunk, though, it sold really well. In October 2014, Ubisoft announced that it sold approximately 10 million copies of the game. They also recently just had a promotion where you could get the game for free through Uplay on PC, so I'm sure more players took advantage of getting the game there. But these different game award outlets that, do their awards kind of later into the next year could actually recognize Far Cry 3. And as a result, it was nominated for 6 BAFTAs, including Best Game, and it won for Best Action. It was nominated for 7 DICE Awards, including Game of the Year and Original Music Composition, but it didn't win anything. It was nominated for 4 awards at the Game Audio Network Guild Awards, where it won for Best Dialogue and Best Audio Mix. And it won Game of the Year and 5 other awards at the Canadian Video Game Awards. The legacy of Far Cry 3. Oh, there have been a whole bunch of Far Cry games released since then. First of all, including a standalone expansion, Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, which is like a neon retro-futuristic cyberpunk setting. That's like a nuclear fallout envisioning of 2007 through the lens of 1980s parody of cartoons, films, action films in particularly, and video games.
Which I hear good things about Blood Dragon, at least.
Yeah, definitely. And it released in April 2013. Then you had Far Cry 4, which was the next big numbered sequel, which was set in the fictional country of Kyrat in the Himalayas, and that released in November 2014. Far Cry Primal puts you in 10,000 BC in what would be Central Europe's Carpathian Mountains, and that released in February 2016. Then you had Far Cry 5, which was controversial in a way at its time because it was set in the United States in the fictional Hope County in Montana with very religious, patriotic folk in a time of
stuff.
Donald Trump, let's say. And this was released in March 2018. So then they had Far Cry New Dawn come out the next year in February 2019. And this imagined the nuclear ending from Far Cry 5 set 17 years after that game's events with a reimagined Far Cry 5 map, also in Hope County. And then Far Cry 6 just released on October 6th, 2021, and that is set in the fictional Caribbean island of Yara, getting Giancarlo Esposito to portray the villain, actually getting a name, not like Troy Baker, can you be this Himalayan man? Although, gosh, he did a great job with Pagan Min. Let's be clear. So interesting. That's why we're talking about Far Cry finally on the show.
I have like zero interest in playing a Far Cry game, but it is always fun to see all the villains. And yeah, Troy Baker does a very good job as Pagan Min. And also, I want to give that game a shout out, Far Cry 5 specifically, or 4, right? 4? Yeah.
Yeah, 4 has the special ending.
Yeah, he tells you to wait and you're supposed to get up and leave, but if you wait, then he just comes back and the credits roll.
Yeah. Just
that's A+. I'll give them an A+ on that one.
Although I should correct myself, Far Cry 5 has a similar ending as well.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, you go in the church where the Seed family is, and you're supposed to like arrest him. But if you choose not to, if you choose to disobey the order, then the marshal that's with you is like, "It's not worth it. Let's just walk out," and then credits roll. So I don't know if a similar thing happens in 6. I think it's too early to tell, but that'd be great if it did. Let's talk about the musician this week. See, normally we talk about the composer, but the main composer in this game is Brian Tyler. And we've talked about Brian Tyler before for his work on Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. In fact, this was the video game project that Brian Tyler worked on before Ubisoft's like, "Hey, can you bring your music to Assassin's Creed?" the next year with Black Flag. So let's talk about the musician that is featured on this game's soundtrack. And her name is Serena McKinney. Serena McKinney was born in American Fork, Utah, in the United States. She started playing violin at age 3. She is a professional violinist. And for a time, she moved to South Korea with her family for a few years, but then returned back to Utah at age 11. At age 16, she was the soloist in Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto at the Utah Symphony's Salute to Youth concert. She then decided to attend the Colburn School of Performing Arts in Los Angeles. She doesn't have too many interviews based on what her career was like. I mean, I think I saw something that like her favorite TV show is The Wire. That's a good choice for a favorite TV show. So not much of like how was her career in music started. I couldn't even find a Twitter account for her, to be honest. But as far as what Serena McKinney is doing today, she married composer Ludwig Göransson in 2018. Now, Ludwig Göransson, I don't know if we're ever going to get to talk about him unless he starts doing video game work. But he is one of the most prolific film and TV composers right now. He composed the score to Black Panther, The Mandalorian, Tenet. I think he did composition work on the scores for Community and New Girl kind of in his earlier career. So yeah, Sarah McKinney married Ludwig Göransson, and they had a son named Apollo in 2019. You can follow her on Instagram at Serena Jinju, SerenaJinju. Serena McKinney's discography as a performer is impressive. The games list, not as long as some of the other lists here, but some notable works include Africa, Resident Evil 5, Dark Void, Lost Planet 2, Medal of Honor Warfighter. Oh my gosh, I forgot that was a title. Certainly a video game title, that's for sure. Far Cry 3, Gears of War 4, and Gears 5. Some TV shows that she's done performance work for include DC's Legends of Tomorrow and Blind Spot. And here are just some of the films that she has performer credits on: I Am Legend, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Fast and Furious, Dragon Ball Evolution.
Oh boy.
Those last couple are Brian Tyler joints, so that kind of makes sense. The Last Airbender, Green Lantern, Toy Story 3, Wreck-It Ralph, Despicable Me 2, Monsters University, Frozen, Rio 2, Minions, The Peanuts Movie, The Good Dinosaur, Finding Dory, The Secret Life of Pets, Moana, La La Land, Cars 3, Spider-Man Homecoming, The Incredibles 2, Ralph Breaks the Internet, Alita Battle Angel, Aquaman, Spider-Man Far From Home, Frozen 2, Venom, and Toy Story 4.
That was a hell of a list.
It's pretty impressive. And it might make sense, as of late, that she is the concert master, or the first chair or lead violinist, on The Mandalorian and Tenet. So she's also performing on those scores that her husband composed. So, yes, Brian Tyler is the main composer for Far Cry 3. He did work on this game before Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. but there didn't seem to be that much as far as like the thoughts on what it took to compose this game and all that. Another thing to note is that this game also uses some licensed tracks in its game. So for example, not a song we're going to cover, but Paper Planes, the 2008 track by MIA, is used in the game's opening cinematic sequence. We'll use a licensed track, which I think is more appropriate for the game overall and what people remember from this game, but seeing that trivia bit, it's like, oh yeah, I do remember All I Wanna Do Is Take Your Money, kind of as the kids are skydiving. Whoa, look at us being...
We're rich and white. Woo!
Yes, that's ding, 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 putting it right on the nose. So yeah, that song definitely does play in the beginning of the game. But let's get to the 5 critical tracks for Far Cry 3. And I think it's fitting that we would have to start with the first critical track. This is Far Cry 3. Of course, composed by Brian Tyler, as all of these tracks are, well, except one, but I think we'll be able to hear the difference there. As you might expect with a track called the same title as the game it's from, this is the main theme. I think it's also used in the ending, but we may get to that more specifically later in the Critical 5. It's a track that really has this heavy rock guitar drop, as you hear in the clip, with these drums that lead into it, but yet has these vocals continue through. And I think it's a good kind of establishing theme for, especially when you're kind of, in a way, like doing a soft reboot of Far Cry and kind of setting it on this new trajectory for the future. I really don't think it fits the island tribal feel that the game is set in with the Rook Islands, but at the same time, I feel like it gives you like a sense of wonder and exploration with like the vocals and that, all of that kind of instrumentation along with it, but it has that edge to it with the electric guitar drop. Kind of a good establishing main theme that really gets things going here.
Yeah, I think I agree that it's a little bit weird that it's not what you'd expect from the setting. You'd think there would be some tribal like vibes in here if they're going to make that such a big part of the story. That this white person is a warrior of this tribe. Oh man, even just saying it out loud. But I don't know. There isn't a lot here for me personally. I think it's fine. I think it does like have this sort of mysterious air to it about this island, this unfamiliar island that you find yourself on. But I don't know. There's just not a lot to it, I guess.
I feel like it would be better if there were a more intense or memorable melody instead of like slow plodding chord progressions. And like, I think that may be the difference why. For the next critical track, let's get into this one. It's kind of a similar piece, but different in enough of a way. This is Falling into a Dream. So it's a pretty similar vibe, right? It has a really similar instrumentation to the main theme there. I feel like this one really stood out to me, maybe because I remembered this well, because this plays when you return to Daisy, the first of your friends that you save and when you meet Dr. Earnhardt. And it's after you've gone through like this mushroom-induced hallucination. So maybe it's almost like Requiem for a Dream inspired a little bit. But I like the difference here where it adds the piano as kind of a primary instrument that kind of adds the rocking back and forth, the kind of, it gives, you know, a kind of pace and purpose, but the alternation there has like an unsteadiness to it. And so I really like this one. I kind of identify with this one. Again, maybe because it's how far I got in the game, but one that I felt like putting here in the Critical 5.
Yeah, I think I like this one. It's a very similar vibe, like you said, to the last Critical track. I think this one adds enough. I mean, piano, obviously. That's how you fix every song. I think this one does a little bit better at the same vibe that the main theme of the game does, if that makes sense. Like, this feels more there. I sound like an insane person trying to describe this, but hopefully there's some understanding of what I mean.
Yeah, I think they do capture it well with like kind of falling into the uncertainty, especially with all of the drugs that do go on in this game and how Jason is losing himself from the rich white boy to the warrior, I guess. I don't know. Let's continue that descent, though, with Critical track number 3, and here come the tribal drums. This is Journey into Madness. Would you have guessed that electronic synths were big in video game music at the time? Yeah, me neither. Also, just electronic music in general. Dubstep? Oh, we'll get to some dubstep, don't you worry. So, this piece apparently plays when you save a villager who tells you where your brother Riley is, where your younger brother has been kidnapped. And here comes that tribal percussion. Yes, with a lot of different kinds of electronic synth. Starts with kind of the lower synths there, and then you get the very overt synth chords there. I do feel like it's kind of giving you that feel of like you're running through the jungle, but almost like in a simulation, as it were. So maybe like your mental state's falling apart, but you're in that jungle setting. Like finally you're getting this jungle feel. Also, when I listen to it, it really makes me think of Suicide Mission, the piece from Mass Effect 2. Like the da da da, like that kind of rising action almost feels like it's taken right from there. And of course it does something different. I'm not going to suggest any lifting or anything like that, but it just makes me feel like that. Like there's the peril of it, but also a weird sense of heroism, I guess.
It's got the same sort of vibe, basically. Vibe does a lot of heavy lifting on this show.
I guess so.
Mainly because of me. But this is what I'm talking about. This is what I expect from a game that takes place on a tropical island where there's still tribal people living and pirates are around. Like, the drums make this whole song just more what I would think of with the very little knowledge of Far Cry 3 that I have. And I think it works super well. Yeah, but here's a piece, number 4 on the Critical 5, that it is the licensed track we're including here. And, oh boy, it's a fun one. This is Make It Bundem.
We must rock the place, turn up the bass and make them all have fun. Skrillex ablaze the fire, make it fun. Then we must rock the place, turn up the bass and make some sound. Why run? And we will end your week just like a Sunday.
This piece is performed by Skrillex, featuring Damian Marley, who is the youngest son of the legendary Bob Marley. And this song plays during the Kick the Hornet's Nest mission. Basically, you use a flamethrower to destroy drug crops. A whole lot of pot. And then you eventually blow up a boat using an RPG. But since Jason gets high off of the smoke of all of the burning crops, his ability to aim weapons drops noticeably if you get kind of caught in the smoke. So many people consider this to be the most famous singular mission of the game, and how this music comes in. Almost reminds me of Watch Dogs 2 with The Day Is My Enemy when you're controlling like the robot in that game. How it's like this licensed track that comes in and like it's a big musical moment. It just stands out. And yeah, the track kind of loops as you're using this flamethrower because it's reggae with dubstep. And boy, what a pairing. I'm not sure I've heard anything like it before. I certainly didn't get to that mission when I was playing Far Cry 3, but I can totally understand how it's a big standout moment and a great track to go along with it.
I think there's an Avicii song that has a very similar vibe to this, though it's not quite dubstep. This song is incredibly weird and incredible because it is weird. I have never heard of this mission, actually, but just listening to this song and getting a slight description, that's all I need. I know exactly what the tone of this thing is.
Just light it up, baby.
It's absolutely perfect. I am not a huge fan of Skrillex's work, just because I don't really like dubstep personally. Nothing against the man himself, but this is fun. I like it when genres that I don't like mix themselves with genres that you wouldn't think they'd fit with, and then are good and dumb, and I love it. I love it. It's great. This is my favorite song of the Critical 5.
Game soundtracks should be able to have fun with licensed music. It makes me think of I Need a Hero in Saints Row 3. I wonder what's going to happen with the upcoming Guardians of the Galaxy game, how much license they're going to have with some of these famous licensed tracks. So it's something more games should be able to do, and I think this is a good fitting inclusion into the Critical 5. But to wrap things up on that front, let's finally highlight Serena McKinney. This is the piece she's highlighted on, and this is Further. Of course, still composed by Brian Tyler, but featuring violinist Serena McKinney. And it is definitely a take on that main Far Cry 3 theme, but just including McKinney's solo violin. And I think it's just amazing how much that just adds to the artistry and just kind of puts her talents on a showcase here, and how it just adds to the piece. This may be what is included in the credits version or at the end of the game, just as a kind of like wrap up, but adding things to it. So yeah, I feel like it was important to include here because it highlights Miss McKinney.
Oh man, it's such a good violin part too. I agree that I think it just adds so much to this piece, because I wasn't a huge fan of it, if you remember from 5 minutes ago. But adding the violin here absolutely just knocks it out of the park, and McKinney is one hell of a violin soloist.
Just fantastic. A great inclusion there for sure. Let's get to some tracks on the cutting room floor. I have 2, and this first one is called Heat. With my overall lack of familiarity with the Far Cry 3 soundtrack, I included this one primarily because a lot of YouTube commenters on the Ubisoft Music playlist version of the soundtrack of this game were saying like, oh, I wish this should have been the main theme of the game. Oh, I have such fond nostalgia for this. And I guess they say it plays when you defeat the main antagonist of the game, not Voss. Ah, that's a shame. But listening to it, I think it's honestly just Journey into Madness slowed down. It kind of gives me those same tones and pitches and feelings of the Suicide Mission track from Mass Effect 2, but it's not as heavy on that tribal percussion. And so maybe there's something to it when, you know, people think like this is like a secondary theme. We're like, oh, it should be the main theme, but that's really the main reason why I included it here.
Yeah, but the dropping out of the drums it takes away a lot.
Yeah.
Like a lot. I think I prefer the regular Journey into Madness way more.
I agree. That's why one's in the critical 5 and the other isn't. The other one, though, is a pretty neat piece. I'll give it that. This is Fever Dream. This one plays apparently in the Payback mission, which is kind of that midpoint in the game when you assault Voss's compound. And I just like this piece because it shows the range of how crazy are we trying to go with some of the electronic music and the dubstep influences here. It's a wild one. You get a lot of crazy percussion with those electronic elements mixed. I like the alternating panning bass a lot. Definitely listen to this with good headphones. It's a really rewarding listen. It's just so cool, and it's very different to what we've listened so far. But yeah, it's worth being on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, again, like I said earlier, I'm not usually a huge fan of dubstep, but I'd be lying if I said that dubstep does not provide a very interesting auditory experience with stuff like the bass and all that. I think this song is pretty cool, specifically because it is completely different from everything else we've listened to, except maybe the Skrillex song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a good way to wrap things up overall. So what will I never forget about Far Cry 3? I mean, I enjoyed what I played. Maybe I should give it another shot. Maybe I should find a classic edition. I never heard if it was like a good, faithful remaster or anything like that. Or maybe I just dig my Steam version back out again, or the Uplay version I got.
Unfortunately, because it's Ubisoft, those are both the same version.
I mean, yeah, let's be honest. It's just, what client do you want to play it through? But from what I remember playing, I remember having a good time with it. It was definitely like a way of taking like what Ubisoft Montreal learned from Assassin's Creed and bringing it into Far Cry. You look at like the radio towers and things like that, like, oh, climb and kind of take out the pirate influence, and as a result, you get a fast travel point to get around the open world. I mean, it's things like that. So I do like Assassin's Creed a lot, and it was kind of like an infusion of all that. Oh, do you hunt, creatures to then craft things and improve your character? Oh, go figure. So I probably should give it another try. Certainly before I, try another Far Cry game in the present and then bounce off it like I did with 5. So I don't know. Maybe I start with 3 again.
I don't have a lot of desire to return to the Far Cry world. I think I enjoy hearing about it from my roommate who tries every single one of them. I think I prefer hearing his stories to playing them myself. Though the thing that I will never forget about Far Cry 3 is actually around the time that the game came out, I was in a GameStop and they had a big poster of the box art. And there was an old lady in line in front of me at the cash register. And she commented on how, oh man, that looks cool. That guy looks cool. And the guy in GameStop was trying to tell this old lady about Far Cry 3 and Voss. And then at some point, I don't remember how he got to this point, but he pointed to the head of the guy buried under the sand and was like, and that's you. And this lady got actually angry. It was like, that's not me. I'm not there. And walked out of GameStop. And I hope that lady is doing great.
Oh.
It was one of the most surreal GameStop encounters I've ever had.
Why do I feel like she would be an anti-vaxxer?
You're probably not wrong.
That kind of sounds like that kind of reality disconnect. Anyway, putting that all aside, let's transition to our next game and let's talk about a fan cover, a fan remix, whether it's on OC Remix, YouTube, wherever it is. I found a take on the Far Cry 3 main theme from YouTuber 16 in Mono. And this is a track that really just amps up the metal instrumentation on that drop, and it sounds so good. I appreciate it, and I hope you do too. Please enjoy. We'll be right back.
Come here, back into my realm of spooky pumpkins and ghosts and apparently zombies, because I've decided that's my theme this month on accident. But we're going to talk about some more zombies. We're going to talk about the original Resident Evil 2, not the remake that came out in 2019. The original. This was actually a listener request from Twitter user .torny. Thank you for suggesting this game. I had not actually listened to the soundtrack of this game before, because I had never played it until recently. We'll get to that part later. For now, let's talk about the game in broad strokes. So it was originally released for the PlayStation on January 21st, 1998 in North America, January 19th, 1998 in Japan, and then a couple months later, because this is how it was back then, April 29th, 1998 in the PAL regions. And then it was re-released quite a lot after that. There was a DualShock version released on August 6th, 1998 in Japan and November 11th, 1998 in North America. There was a PC release in February of 1999 for Japan and North America, but again, PAL did not get it until April of 1999. And legendarily, the game was ported through what is considered one of the more famous miracle ports in gaming history to the Nintendo 64. And this released in North America on Halloween in 1999, with Japan and PAL regions releasing in January and February of 2000, respectively. I have always heard the N64 port talked about as, don't play this version, but it's wild that it exists and is as complete as it is.
Yeah, right.
There were also Dreamcast and GameCube releases as well. I'm pretty sure you could buy it on the PSN store for PlayStation 3, but it hasn't really been re-released again since the GameCube, for reasons that we will talk about. So this game was developed and published by Capcom. It is the sequel to 1996's Resident Evil, which, as we've talked about before, largely credited for creating the foundation of the genre that we now call survival horror. We've talked about two other games in the Resident Evil series. Resident Evil 7 came up in episode 91 during my last trip through Spooky Town, and Resident Evil 4 earlier this year at episode 119. So those are both games that sort of entirely changed the franchise's format. 7 famously brought it into a first-person perspective, while 4 had brought the series to the over-the-shoulder perspective that the remake of Resident Evil 2 would later adopt. But here, this game, we're going to talk about classic style Resident Evil. What does that mean? Well, way back in the day, before any of us knew how to make 3D games because it was so brand new, games like Resident Evil used something called tank controls. We've probably talked about tank controls a couple of times with Silent Hill 2 and 3, because those games also have tank controls, but I don't remember if I've explained them well, so I'll do it just in case. Basically, with tank controls, when you hit forward or back on the D-pad, your character will move forward and back based on which way they are facing, not which way the camera is, showing, if that makes sense. And then if you hit left or right, the character will rotate back and forth. And that's how you move your character in this world. Tank controls are not really looked at fondly nowadays. I don't think they're that bad in games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but there is a pretty good reason why you basically don't see games that control with this sort of control scheme anymore. It's very clunky.
Yeah, basically Mario 64 nailed how you move a character around a 3D world with that camera, and I feel like every game's tried to emulate or improve on that since, because yeah, you're right, tank controls were a thing at a time.
Yeah, every once in a while you'll get like a indie game that has tank controls still.
Yeah, it's like a nostalgic callback.
Yeah, there is some nostalgia there for people that really like that control scheme. But we know how to make a character move in 3D space now, so, you know. But also, it does set camera angles, fixed camera angles. Basically, you walk into this hallway. If you're in this area of the building, the camera is always this angle looking at you on pre-rendered backgrounds. And you don't really have any camera control like we would get later. And that was kind of their way of getting around the fact that 3D cameras wouldn't really work until, 2008? Like a full decade after this? I don't know. So the name of the game in classic Resident Evil, one of the most important parts, and this is sort of present, not as much I feel like, but is very present in 7 onwards, is limited inventory space and mixed with resource scarcity, meaning there is only so much ammo and healing items that you can find in the building, which, fun fact, this is the only game I've ever seen. There is a canon reason why there is just ammo and weapons stashed in random parts of the police station.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can find a document while exploring that says, hey, the police chief says that in order to keep terrorists from getting a hold of our guns and ammo, we're just going to put all of the guns and ammo in random spots. and then the second half is, yeah, okay, so when the zombies started showing up, this meant we couldn't find any of our ammo or weapons. It's amazing. You have to really be mindful about how you use the ammo you're given, or how you use the first aid sprays and the green herbs and all that, because there's only a fixed amount of them in the game. This also applies to game saves. Because in classic Resident Evil, you can only save at the series' signature typewriters, which are still the save points today in modern Resident Evil. You can only save with them if you have an item called an ink ribbon. And there are only so many ink ribbons in the game. So even your ability to save the game is trapped behind a resource scarcity thing. I don't personally like that. I think that takes it a step too far, but there are a lot of people that really like the ink ribbon system, so much so that I believe the remake of RE2 has an option to put ink ribbons in the game.
Yeah, if you want the difficulty and all that. And also it's based on like if you use, few ink ribbons or you don't use any, like that helps your score at the end, your ranking. So all of that.
Mm-hmm.
For those that care.
Yeah, for those that care about that. The story of Resident Evil 2 is the same old song and dance we've been hearing for years, because this actually might be the game that set up this sort of template. 2 months after the incident at the Spencer Mansion in the original Resident Evil, Raccoon City has been overcome with Umbrella's deadly T-virus, which is a virus that reanimates those it kills as zombies, and sometimes even mutates them into monsters like the very mean Lickers. Leon Kennedy is a rookie police officer straight out of the academy who finds himself stuck in the middle of this crisis alongside Claire Redfield, the sister of the character in the original game, Chris Redfield. Leon soon finds himself in the massive Raccoon City police station, filled with zombies of his fellow officers as well as refugees who were sheltering there. He tasks himself with finding any survivors still in the building and helping them find a way to get out of the city alive. Can Leon and Claire succeed in escaping Raccoon City? Are there any other survivors left to save? Who is the mysterious Ada Wong, who claims she came to the city looking for her boyfriend, John? And why are liquors so mean to me specifically? This is why I will ask, Peter, what are our experiences with Resident Evil 2?
First and foremost, I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Sai. They host a Resident Evil podcast called First Aid Spray. So if you're a big fan of the franchise, go check that out. Definitely a lot to talk about with Resident Evil in the past couple years and even beyond that. So my experience with the original Resident Evil, because I've been seeing Sai play this game, speedrun this game, just be amazing at the original Resident Evil 2. And I'm like, it's not necessarily for me, but you know what? I'll give this 2019 remake a shot. Really enjoyed the remake. Don't have it in me, though, necessarily to go back to the original. After seeing all the quality of life improvements that the remake did make for the original Resident Evil 2, I have not played it. I've seen some gameplay. It is, classic Resident Evil as it is, and, kind of established that foundation for the franchise, but I only know the remake personally, as far as actually playing it.
And, hot take, the remake is a way better game. It just plays better, because I played it a couple weeks ago, about a month ago actually at this point, because I mentioned it on the show that I had played the original Resident Evil 2, and I did not like it. I think that the atmosphere and the characters and the music are all very well put together. I think the gameplay and the unforgiving nature of the difficulty, which is a result of, again, something we'll talk about later on, oh boy, it doesn't age well. I had to play the intro of the game where you are on the streets of Raccoon City and zombies are all over. I had to play it like 4 times before I didn't die. You don't get a save point until you get into the police station. I don't know. I pushed through it with various methods of cheating because I have no shame in my life. And yeah, it's not for me. I'm probably going to try Resident Evil 3 with the same sort of setup at some point this month. I don't know. Classic Resident Evil on the PlayStation, not my bag, which is going to be super interesting because by the time this episode comes out, I will have started streaming the GameCube remake of the first game, and we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I think this game is another one of those games on the pedestal of like, this is a really good speedrunning game. Like you mentioned, your friend has been speedrunning the game for a while. I think it's up there with like Super Metroid and Mario 64 because people are so wild at this game. Pat Wavon, one of the YouTubers that I watch a lot, well, he's more a Twitch guy now. He plays Resident Evil 2 quite often, and he like knows that game like the back of his hand. And it's really interesting to watch people that are that good at the game. I'm never going to play it again myself. So let's talk about how this game came to be, though, because it is a highly influential horror game. I'm not going to argue against that. So this game began production a single month after the completion of the first Resident Evil. And the team that developed it was, half of it was people that had worked on the original project, and the other half were actually like fresh new hires to Capcom getting ready to make their first game with the company. As the original Resident Evil's previous producer, Tokuro Fujiwara, had actually left Capcom at this point to make Tomba, the game we talked about recently, the director of Resident Evil 1, Shinji Mikami, moved into the producer's seat, and his director's chair was then filled by one Hideki Kamiya, who has been mentioned quite often on this show. He would go on to be the creator of things like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta and The Wonderful 101, etc., etc. Apparently, though, these two did not really get along. The article I was reading said they had regular, quote, creative disagreements during the initial days of the project, so much so that at a certain point, Mikami actually just sort of stepped back and only required one presentation of a build a month, which is not the usual, in case anybody is wondering. The very first build of Resident Evil 2 that was ever shown was a very different game than the one we got. So it was shown off at V-Jump Festival in July of 1996, and Mikami refers to this build as Resident Evil 1.5. It was kind of similar to the final project in some ways. I mean, it still took place in Raccoon City. It still took place 2 months after the original game, and it still featured 2 playable characters, one of which was still Leon Kennedy. The team wanted to keep the terror elements with their cast in RE2 by putting the player in control of characters who were not really accustomed to such frightening situations. So you can't just bring back Jill Valentine or Chris Redfield if you want that, because they already have zombie experience. And also, Jill would be the playable character of the next game anyways, so what does it matter? And so they started with Leon Kennedy, who was pretty much the same as he would be when the final game would come out. In place of Claire, though, there was a woman named Elza Walker, who was a bike racer on vacation in her wonderful hometown of Raccoon City. What a time to take a vacation to Raccoon City. In this initial version of the game, Leon and Elza at no point crossed paths, and they each had 2 supporting cast members instead of the 1 that each one got in the final build. So Leon would be assisted by fellow RCPD officer Marvin Branagh, who, in the final product, obviously would be encountered as a dying man who orders Leon to find survivors and get the hell out of the police station. And he's also in the remake as one of the most interesting parts of that remake. And also, Leon would be assisted by Linda No Last Name. And this character reportedly would eventually be reworked and would become Ada Wong. Meanwhile, Elza would still be assisted by Sherry Birkin, who remains part of Claire's campaign in the final product and in the remake, as well as a man named John, also no last name, who would be reworked into the character Robert Kendo, who is the owner of a local Raccoon City gun shop in the final product, that you know for roughly a minute and a half before he dies. So, did great for himself. Good job, John. There were also several other crazy differences in 1.5, like insane differences. So the police station was originally a lot smaller and looked more like, you know, a police station in real life instead of the weird, unrealistic police station in the final game. Though I believe in the remake, they clarified that it used to be a museum and that's why it has such a weird layout. And looks so bizarre as a police station. I don't think I ever found a note saying that in the original. But yeah, this original build had one that was just like a regular police station, and it was a lot smaller. There were also more surviving officers that Leon could interact with. Zombies had fewer polygons in their models, and therefore there could be way more on screen at the same time. There were also changes in the pre-rendered backgrounds, as well as a dynamic soundtrack, both of which would show change and react to in-game events. There was equipable clothing that would change stats and also would show up on the character. And when a character got injured, the clothing would rip and wounds would appear on the character. This was a game being developed for the PlayStation 1.
Yeah, that's crazy for the mid to late 90s.
It's insane to me that they even got far enough that they had a build of a game that was able to do all these things. But this actually didn't end up being what they wanted. See, Mikami kind of came to the conclusion that while the assets and everything sort of, they worked great on their own, but when put together, they really weren't adding up and working as well as the team would kind of like. So this build of the game got to around 60 to 80% completion, and then it was scrapped and production was almost completely restarted. So this caused a secondary problem though, because Mikami had originally planned for Resident Evil 2 to be the final game in the Resident Evil series.
Oops.
Funny how that worked out. There's like 25 of them now. However, surprising nobody other than Mikami, I guess, other members of the team weren't really super happy with the finality of the plot, as it did not allow room for later installments, because he planned for it to be the end. This actually evolved into the idea of what Resident Evil would become as a franchise. Self-contained stories that could star anybody and take place anywhere. So this was the exact moment that Resident Evil became the franchise we know today, basically. Meanwhile, though, Kamiya felt that the only way that they were going to reach Capcom's sales expectations of 2 million copies would be if they seared the game's scenario in a more Hollywood-style plot. And during this time, they also brought in screenwriter Noboru Sugimura, who considered himself a fan of the original game's story, and he was initially just brought in as a consultant to fix little problems with the script, and then he impressed the writing team so much that they actually just brought him in full-time to rework and rewrite the entire scenario of the game. And it was at this point that Elsa was then reworked into Claire Redfield, because that was their way of giving a connection point to Resident Evil 1 through her being Chris's sister.
And it must have helped if he was a fan of the first game.
Yeah. In terms of character designs, though, some real-world examples inspired certain characters. For instance, the character of Annette Birkin was based on Jodie Foster. Even in the remake, you can kind of see that.
Oh, yeah, that makes so much sense.
You can absolutely see that even in the remake. But Leon Kennedy was inspired by artist Isao Ohishi's Bloodhound. As in the dog. Leon Kennedy is based on a dog. I don't know what that means or what to do with that information. Leon Kennedy is based on a dog.
He's a golden retriever cop boyfriend.
So backgrounds for the game were actually created on, and somebody's going to know what this means, SGI-O2 computers, with each one taking approximately 2 to 3 weeks to render. Just for the backgrounds. Think of how many pre-rendered backgrounds are in that game. Whew. Leon and Claire's models were made more detailed, which unfortunately is what led to them limiting not only how many zombies could be in a shot at the same time, 7 is the limit in case you were wondering, but also they had to get rid of the equipable clothing stuff and as well as the battle damage, which got scaled down to if your character's hurt, they will walk slower and limp and hold their sides.
Memory and CD space sucks.
Yep. As for cutscenes, though, specifically the pre-rendered ones, I didn't know this. They were actually first filmed using action figures and stop motion, and then were animated on top of, and that's how they made the pre-rendered cutscenes in this game. I did also find, interestingly, Ada's model for pre-rendered cutscenes was never finished, and so she is the only main character in the entire game who never shows up in a pre-rendered cutscene.
Oh my gosh, that's wild.
In the American release, the game was actually given more violent game over screens. If you've never seen the Resident Evil game over screens, Leon falls over and all the zombies around him start eating him because they're zombies. And it was also made harder here, like much harder, to, as was the style at the time, combat any lost sales that would be due to short-term rentals. This was not an issue in Japan because, and I don't know if you know this, I learned this a couple years ago, game rentals are illegal in Japan. Like still.
What?
They're considered copyright infringement.
Okay.
So that's interesting to know. I learned this because of a Super Bunny Hop video way like a year ago, like 2 years ago maybe, where he went and talked about like video game cafes in Japan and how they're like this weird gray area because technically people are renting that game and that's illegal. So wild, absolutely wild. And that's still the case now today. Resident Evil 2 reviewed very, very well upon release. 93% on game rankings and an 89 on Metacritic. Praises were heaped on it for its story, its characters, its atmosphere, its music, its graphics, you name it, they praised Resident Evil 2 for it. The only regular criticisms that I saw lobbed at it were frustrations with the inventory system, as well as some questionable puzzle placement and design, which was the style at the time for PS1 horror games. There were also some criticism given to its voice acting, but as we learned last week, could have been way worse.
Not only that with House of the Dead, but the original Resident Evil.
Yeah, also that. The original Resident Evil is... We didn't get to Jill Sandwich from nothing, guys. Also, Jill Sandwich is nothing. However, each time Resident Evil 2 was released somewhere else, the score got lower and lower. This was a very interesting sort of pattern to see. N64 currently has an 87% on game rankings with an 89 on Metacritic. The PC and Dreamcast versions are both at an 80% on game rankings. The Dreamcast version has a 77 on Metacritic. No Metacritic score for the PC version. Weird. And worst of all, the GameCube release earned a 63% on game rankings and a 59 on Metacritic, because this is just evidence you can't just repackage a game over and over and expect it to always hold up, unless that game is Resident Evil 4, apparently. The GameCube release was like a combo release of 2 and 3, but it was just straight up a port of the PS1 versions of both games. And that didn't go over super great. In terms of sales, though, this game absolutely crushed it. It was given a $5 million advertising budget, which resulted in it becoming the fastest selling game of its time in North America. Within the first weekend after release, the game had sold 380,000 copies, grossing nearly $19 million, which shattered the previous sales records that had been set by games like Mario 64 and Final Fantasy VII. And by the month and a half point of the game being out, it had sold more than 3 million copies, with only 1 million of those coming from America and about 2 million of those coming from Japan alone.
Whoa.
While it is generally referred to as one of the best games ever made, it didn't win any awards because this was back in the day when, like, game awards ceremonies weren't a thing quite yet. You mainly had publisher awards at this point, which EGM, in their 1998 Gamers' Choice Awards, nominated it for both Best Adventure Game of the Year and Best PlayStation Game of the Year, and it lost both of those categories to Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, also 1998, one of the best years ever for video game releases.
Yeah, it's up there. So Resident Evil 2 appears in an episode of the British sitcom Spaced. I'm mentioning this because in this episode, one of the characters apparently hallucinates that he's in a zombie apocalypse scenario. And this episode is reportedly what inspired Edgar Wright to make his zombie film, Shaun of the Dead. So Resident Evil 2 inspired Shaun of the Dead indirectly.
Wow.
Leon would, of course, go on to appear as the main character of Resident Evil 4, but he would also appear as one of the player characters in the very well-loved and definitely not super-hated Resident Evil 6. Claire would go on to star in various spin-offs like Resident Evil Code Veronica and Resident Evil Revelations 2. I didn't realize she somehow avoided being in Resident Evil 6. Good for you, Claire. Anyways, after the release of a GameCube remake of the original Resident Evil in 2002, fans really wanted Resident Evil 2 to get the same treatment. They wanted that game to get remade in the same way, and Capcom just didn't do that. Like I said, when they released 2 and 3 on the GameCube, they were just the PlayStation versions. This was after the Resident Evil remake. And then, 2019, at last, like manna from the heavens, Resident Evil 2 remake hit store shelves. Remade in the style of Resident Evil 4. Such a good game. Possibly now one of the best horror games I've ever played, ever.
It is fantastic. I really enjoyed it, certainly. And I also remember the announcement in 2015 of Capcom saying, "We do it!" when it comes to Resident Evil 2 remake.
And then I think in 2017, that's when we got the first trailer.
Yeah, and oh my gosh, a great trailer.
Mm-hmm. People lost their minds. They had been asking for that remake for like 15 years up to that point. So, good on them for finally making it happen. So let's talk about one of the composers on Resident Evil 2. His name is Shusaku Uchiyama. So here's the thing. Wasn't able to find a huge amount on this man. He was born January 2nd, 1971 in Osaka, Japan. His blood type is A. He left Capcom around 2012 to join BPM Studios Incorporated, and he actually has come back in a freelance capacity to Capcom every once in a while, most recently working on the soundtrack to Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil Village. Good talk, that's all I got for you. His discography is obviously Resident Evil 2. He also did music work for Resident Evil on the GameCube and Resident Evil 4. He did the music for Darkside Chronicles, which I think was like a anthology game recounting the events of the first 3 games. I don't know. This series...
I think it was on Wii?
No, that was Umbrella Chronicles, I think.
Oh, no.
This series has so many damn releases, I can't keep up with them. He also did music for Operation Raccoon City, Resident Evil 2 in 2019, and Resident Evil Village this year. He is also credited for providing music for Mega Man X3, Mega Man 8, and providing the theme for Chillman's stage in Mega Man 10. He is one of the composers for PNO3, which I believe got mentioned in the Okami episode, or it might have been in the Resident Evil 4 episode.
Yeah, it's one of the Capcom 5, yeah.
Yeah. And then he is also credited as being a composer and arranger on Devil May Cry 4. So he's got some pretty high-profile Capcom releases under his belt. It's weird that he doesn't seem to have worked on anything else. It's this bizarre gap in time where he did like Operation Raccoon City and then just sort of did like a track here and there for other games later, and then came back to do 2 more Resident Evil games. It's kind of bizarre. So, alongside Mr. Uchiyama, you also have this soundtrack containing tracks composed by Masami Ueda and Shun Nishigaki. There is also one track by Final Fantasy XI composer Naoshi Mizuta, which is a weird connection to draw there. There is apparently a leitmotif that appears in various sections of the game's score. It's a 3-note progression. You can only hear it in one of our critical tracks, but it is there.
Also, a quick shout out for Masami Ueda. We highlighted him previously on the show in our Okami episode.
Ah, right, yes.
So, yes, in case you want to learn more about one of the other main composers on this game.
I knew we'd mentioned them somewhere, I just couldn't remember where. So the style of music apparently also changes to fit the location, which you'd think would be a no-brainer, right? But everywhere has the same vibe, because it's zombie apocalypse all over the place and you're in a city the whole time. But the examples that I read about were In the police station, there's an emphasis on ominous sounding piano. Then when you get outside on the streets of the city, the music becomes more built around military style drums. And then especially music for key events also has its own style, which is music that is meant to bring about the vibe of like a Hollywood movie score. So like think of boss fights or cutscenes and stuff like that. All right, I have flapped my gums enough about the words of Resident Evil 2. One day I'm going to learn how to do good segues. Let's talk about the 5 critical tracks. The first one being The First Floor. This song was, of course, composed by Shusaku Uchiyama, and as you might have guessed, it plays when you're on the first floor of the Raccoon City Police Department, where a majority of the game takes place. Oh, I really like this song a lot. It's got this tense feeling with the strings in the background the whole time, and then, like, little piano bits really drive it home. Man, I'm seeing a liquor in the back of my mind listening to this song, because that's where you encounter them for the first time, way earlier than in the remake, might I add.
Yeah, he's gonna get you.
Liquors are still some of the scariest goddamn creatures ever put into a video game. They're terrifying. But there's a track on the cutting room floor that probably is a little more well known, but I feel like this song specifically does a really good job at sort of nailing down the atmosphere of the Raccoon City Police Department building, which is, oh, I don't want to be here. Oh, I don't want to be here. I think it does great at that.
I agree with you. When I heard your cutting room floor, I'm like, oh, even I recognize this song. Why isn't this one here? But this one is still really good. Like it sets up that uncomfortable feeling. I think you're right. The piano licks give it a whole lot of character. And then even outside the clip, before the loop, like there's this big thud that's like really effective, and it just like I would imagine back then it would make you jump. I also like how it's not as loud. Like it's not as loud as we generally hear a lot of the tracks, but it's just meant to be that kind of like in the back of your ears. Like
yeah, it's present.
Yeah.
Present but sneaky. Following that is probably the most well-known song in the entire game. I'm pretty sure, as far as I can tell, it is Secure Place. This plays when you walk into a save room. Zombies can't walk into the save room. So when you hear this song, it means, okay, I'm safe for now.
Do you want to use a ribbon?
Do you want to use an ink ribbon or put some stuff in the item box? If this save point has an item box, not all of them do.
Oh, boo.
Yeah, it's a lot. I think when talking about this song, it reminds me a lot of how I talked about like the Resident Evil 4 save room theme, which I think this is a much better version of that song, to the point where I'm pretty sure this is one of the only songs that made it into the remake almost unchanged.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that there's just this air of like, all right, you can take a breath here. You're safe for now, but you gotta go back out that door at some point. Can't just stay in here the whole time. And I think it really, once again, nails that feeling of like, okay, I'm okay. There are like 3 zombies outside that door, and I'm gonna have to deal with them. But for now, I can just breathe. And I really, really really respect the vibe that these save room themes tend to have.
I think you're right with the comparison to Resident Evil 4's save room theme. It's a really good comparison. I think also why it holds up so well is because maybe it's just the reliance on a piano MIDI, but it's a pretty good sounding piano MIDI. You add a little bit of reverb in there, and like you don't hear like how harsh or off it can be. And so I think it holds up super well today.
I agree. And like I said, in the remake, this is one of the few songs that is almost untouched. It's great. Let's get into a boss fight theme, though, with our third critical track, The First Malformation of G. This, of course, plays when you are fighting the mutated, I don't even remember his damn first name, Dr. Birkin, who has infected himself with the G virus, which is a worse version of the T virus, because letters don't mean anything anymore. And you fight mutated versions of this dude a total of 3 damn times. Would you believe it if I told you that in the original Resident Evil 2, the boss fights were worse than they are in the remake?
Doesn't surprise me with the lack of managing of the 3D space.
They are way worse. But even so, like this song, it was composed by Masami Ueda. I listened to this and I'm like, oh yeah, this is the score of a 1998 PlayStation action game. This is what they all sounded like, and it probably has a lot to do with this game's score. It stands out on those merits alone. It's very dramatic, a lot more dramatic than we think about stuff in horror games today, for sure. And I don't know, it really stuck out to me listening to the song.
Super fitting for the time. What was scary music back then and still today? Do you like the Jaws theme? Okay, let's speed it up a little bit. Dun, 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 dun. And then let's give him his own theme. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-da-da. Like, okay, you nailed it. Like, package it up and you made a good action boss theme.
The only one that did differently back then was Silent Hill, where that was just Akira Yamaoka being a huge weirdo. Man, we're going to talk about the original game one of these days and how that soundtrack for one of the tracks samples a dental drill. Sorry in advance. That's how insane Akira Yamaoka is. But yeah, this is what they sounded like back then. It's great.
This is wanting to be Hollywood.
Yes, very, very much so, wanting to be Hollywood without anywhere near the resources of Hollywood. Let's talk about a character theme next, though, because critical track number 4 is Ada's theme. This was once again composed by Masami Ueda. It is very interesting to look back at the character of Ada Wong, knowing what I know now through video game plot knowledge osmosis. This feels very fitting for her theme, though. Like, it's kind of low-key, but it's got like this air of like something's hidden under the surface. You don't have the full story here, which makes sense for Ada Wong. By the way, her whole thing in Resident Evil 2, the original, is so much more lame than the remake. Because in the remake, when you meet Ada, she's like, I'm with the CIA. and I'm like investigating. In the original, she's like, I'm looking for my boyfriend, John. He lived here. And that's it. That's her whole thing.
And that was how you wrote women in the 90s.
That is how you wrote women in 1998 in video games.
Terrible.
We were bad at it back then. Hasn't gotten great since, even in AAA space. But yeah, it's this very fitting, like, theme for this character that, obviously, through pop culture osmosis, is lying to you. She's not here looking for her boyfriend, John. She's a spy. You know this. But, yeah, I don't know. I think this fits her general vibe really, really well.
For sure. A great character theme that, even not knowing much about the original Resident Evil 2 soundtrack, I hear this theme and I'm like, oh yeah, that's Ada's theme for sure. And also, can we just say, again, A+ MIDI choices for the time. Just amazing. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Like, a lot of the MIDIs in this game are very good choices for 1998. Especially the piano, yeah.
But they even compared the year before, like, with Final Fantasy VII. And that's the standout, soundtrack of the time for the console, for PlayStation.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, on One Winged Angel, you get the sampled vocals in there, sure, but the rest of the instruments, not great. But, for here, for Resident Evil 2, play to your strengths. Pianos, flutes, yes. Granted, when you get to some of the brass, it's a little rough, but for this character theme, wow, great choices.
Yeah, it all comes together in a surprisingly nice to listen to way. Anyways, you mentioned vocal samples just then about One Winged Angel. Let's tangentially talk about what could be called legally vocal samples in critical track number 5, the third malformation of G.
Did I say those previous MIDI samples were good? I apologize. Oh.
So, this one was composed by Masami Ueda again. Why is this song in the Critical 5? The MIDIs could have been worse, but you can hear in the sample you could call them vocals. The brass is not great. I think the rest of it is fine, overall. But you can hear the main leitmotif of the game in this song at some points. And also, this is the final boss theme, so it fit really well. This is the third time you fight Birkin, and he's big and mean and has, like, thorns. You know the weird part that I only realized after I finished the game?
What's that?
I never saw Mr. X.
At
any point. And I know he's in the game.
Interesting.
Which is really weird, and I realized that while thinking about the final boss when putting together this Critical 5, because in the remake, he is the final boss, but it's Birkin in the original game. It's bizarre to think about, but you could tell that they were kind of trying to do something new, and I respect that a lot. But those trumpets and that vocal MIDI in general, not the best from a modern viewpoint, I suppose. But I mean, overall, I think it's a fine track. It's just the other tracks do a little bit better job of using their strengths.
And I'll give it credit for calling back the Birkin boss fight theme. Like, hey, you brought back that leitmotif as well. Kudos.
Mm-hmm. It sure is a track. Anyways, let's talk about the tracks of the cutting room floor. Peter, you got a couple? Hit me up.
I do have a couple, because even though I am not that familiar with this soundtrack, there was a time where I listened to this soundtrack and ranked my 10 what I thought were bangers on the soundtrack. And so there were a couple here that they're kind of in the same realm, but let's cover them anyway. The first of these is Credit Line. This is composed by Masami Ueda, and it's the first credit theme. Hey, have we talked enough about how Resident Evil 2 wanted to be Hollywood with its story? Well, you sure feel it here with the vibe that this is putting off. It's like, oh, Leon, oh, Claire, we got out of that danger. Now let's go live our lives as young people. Freeze frame.
I can go back to being an ordinary teenage girl.
But I'm not Chun-Li. So you feel like the piano with the strings here, and it's playing up that emotional swell here. Again, good MIDI choices. It sounds good. You kind of get that feeling that they want that happy Hollywood movie ending, and I feel like it accomplishes that well. So, well done, Ueda.
Yeah, this is the only credit song that I heard because I did not play Scenario B, where you play as Claire. I didn't really feel a need to after playing Leon's campaign and all that. This is sure a lot more fitting than the other song you have on the... Yeah.
Well, why do I love this one then so much more? The other one on the cutting room floor for me is Credit Line of Whole Staff. This one is also composed by Masami Ueda. You know what? Just pump this dumb butt rock into my veins. I love it so much. Like, I hear it. It does not match anything that this game is trying to do, but it sounds so good. Oh, especially that key change in the clip. Get it. Guitar solo. I love it so much. This apparently plays in the second credit ending, so I would assume then, based on what you're saying, that once you finish up Scenario B, that this is then the credits. It's interesting how in different places, like when I've heard this track, like it just, starts rocking right away. And then the version of the soundtrack that I have, like on my computer, this track starts with, I'm going to guess it's Leon's voice. Just a guy that says,
"Hey, it's up to us to take out Umbrella."
It's just like, okay, we're gonna go into it like that. So I don't know, it's stupid. I love it. This is why it's on the cutting room floor.
Oh, it's super dumb. It's super dumb. I would rather have this as wow, this does not match the tone of the game I just played in any way, shape, or form, over what Resident Evil 4 does, which is like, there's this really like weirdly positive, happy animated film credits theme playing. Why? I would 100% any day of the week take what if we just pretended we were a Sonic game for 3 minutes?
Oh, hell yeah.
It's really dumb, and I agree. That's why I like it. I have 2 tracks on the cutting room floor. Again, I mentioned that this one probably had a real argument for being on the Critical 5, and it almost was. And it is The Front Hall. I mean, this is literally the song you hear when you walk into the police station for the first time. It is the music that plays in the front hall of the police station. I would say probably more people would recognize this song as one they remember from Resident Evil 2, but the only reason it lost out to First Floor was because, I don't know, it just felt like First Floor nailed the tone a little bit better, if that makes sense. But Front Hall is still a very good song.
I would have had it here if you didn't. I recognize this one. And I don't know if it's because of if they, translated it really well into the remake, but I'm like, oh, like all these instruments feel like, yes, this is this game. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it helps that it's like one of the first songs you ever hear in the game after getting off the streets covered with, honestly, way too many zombies. Took me 4 tries. The other track on the cutting room floor is also from the police station. It is The Second Floor. This was, again, composed by Shusaku Uchiyama. I should mention, I don't think I mentioned, Front Hall is composed by Masumi Ueda. This song is mainly on the cutting room floor because I like it a lot. It's not as good as the first floor in any way, shape, or form, but it has a lot of similarities to what would go on to be seen as like Akira Yamaoka's style. Like, this feels a lot more Silent Hill-ish than some of the other tracks on the soundtrack, if that makes sense. So it sticks out to me because, man, I like me some Silent Hill soundtracks.
Definitely reminiscent of Silent Hill, so I'm not surprised you put it there. It's definitely has that feel.
So what will I never forget about this game? I don't think it aged well in terms of gameplay. I think, especially at the very beginning, it expects you to have way more, like, agency over how you can move around zombies and such than tank controls and set camera angles that are looking at you from the side can really provide. That's really what it comes down to for me. But I don't know, it's really unforgiving, and it's very, very janky because it's a 3D game that came out in 1998. But even back then, they had the atmosphere down. I mentioned that I played it with cheats. That cheat being, I turned on invincibility because I didn't want to deal with it anymore. Even with the idea that, like, nothing can hurt me or kill me, the game still got me multiple times. So they had that down pat from minute one. It just took them a little while to make a game that was enjoyable to play in the year of our Lord 2021.
Yeah, I think if you have a nostalgic appreciation for this game, definitely play it, definitely enjoy it, definitely know it like the back of your hand, right? But if you are trying to get into the series or approach this game for the first time, absolutely play the remake. It's so good.
100%.
And it really just nailed what it's trying to do with the characters and the atmosphere as well, and just brings it up to a more modern standard. I really, really enjoyed that one. Making me think about going back and playing it, even though I've already played both versions, like both runs.
I have, I believe, convinced Matt to let me co-pilot him through the remake, at least, on stream. So we'll see if that actually ends up happening, because, you know, time.
And also, Leon Kennedy is not getting into Super Smash Brothers.
Also, well, he's the spirit.
Oh, true.
That's closer.
True.
That's closer than Fortnite has ever gotten.
All right. Well, a really good episode, a longer one than usual, but still a really good one to talk about Far Cry 3 and Resident Evil 2. Two sequels that really just kind of propelled their franchise to the next level and really set the foundation of what players should expect from them. And really interesting soundtracks with each of them. I'm really glad we got to cover them. So that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at StringPixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want, hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Masterpieces, is hosted. Tune in to hear how Kingdom Hearts is going to be involved somehow. Which game? When will it happen?
I don't want to talk about it.
Tune into Smasherpieces to figure out how that's going to shake out with Sora in Smash. And you can also find us on podcast services around the globe. So Original Soundchat on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed of podcast episodes, but we also have a Spotify playlist, where if we talk about a video game music track on the show and it's on Spotify, it's getting added to that monster playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Both of these games are on Spotify, though I think RE2 might be missing a track or two. We're going to have to see. I don't think Credit Line of Whole Staff is on there, but I'll find out. I'll figure it out. Don't you worry.
We'll also have to see if Make It Bundem from Far Cry 3 is also on Spotify.
I did check. It is.
Oh, well, reggae and dubstep hype then, I guess. When you're done listening, you can find us on social media for the show at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us and also some suggestions for games that you'd like us to cover, like the original Resident Evil 2. That one was a listener suggestion, so thank you, Datorni. And you can suggest games for us to play because that's our big goal for fleshing out 2021 and possibly even beyond.
And that's ending soon. Oh, God.
Oh, no. Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I have no idea how this is going to go, but I'm going to be talking about Hideki Okugawa.
I will be talking about Asuka Ota.
What a bizarre combination of games. Cannot wait.
We're finally talking about her. It's about dang time.
Every time I see Asuka Ota's name, I'm like, we've talked about her, right? No? What?
Every time. But it's finally happening next week. All right, Joe, let's play us out.
So, obviously, the song to go find a remix or cover of was A Secure Place, the Save Room theme. And I did manage to find one from YouTube channel C Elegy. It is described as a dark, ambient remix of A Secure Place. So please enjoy that. And spooky times will continue later.
All right. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.